Welcome to the Lead, Defend podcast, a show designed to help you grow in faith and leadership as you navigate the stages of young adulthood. We address important faith topics and provide practical life tips, helping you build up your faith as you engage a changing culture. Now, here are your hosts.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Lead Defend. This is Brock, and I'm excited about our guest today. I'm sitting here at my church studio in Rogers, Arkansas, as we're about to have a conference geared at Mormon apologetics. And our guest today is Roger Sherrer. He has a degree in Christian ministry and theology from Liberty University. He also did a degree in apologetics, a Master's of Arts in apologetics at Liberty University, and now attempting to become a doctor in apologetics.
That's right.
Roger, how is it becoming a doctor in apologetics?
Well, my wife's a nurse, travel nurse, RN, and so I tell her that when I do become a doctor in apologetics, that she will refer to me as Dr. Sherrer around the house. And every time I say that, I risk sleeping on the couch that night. So
Is it at least a comfy couch?
It's a very good couch, yeah. Thankfully, we just celebrated our 1-year anniversary, so I haven't had to,
Okay.
not much couch, but yeah. So nonetheless, I tell my congregation, you don't have to call me Dr. Sherrer when that day comes. In fact, please don't, because that feels kind of weird. But
Yeah, so my wife asked me the same question the other day. I've not yet started the process. I'm just thinking about it, and she is making me think about it very, very hard of if I will take off on this doctoral journey. But she asked me the same question of if she's going to have to call me doctor. I was like, I don't know. It feels weird.
Yeah, well, I mean, don't cancel the possibility out yet. So,
Well, Roger, today you're here at our church, and you're about to help with a conference talking about Mormon apologetics, and that's uniquely a part of your story. But there's also a lot of other things that are packed into your story. So why don't you tell us a little bit where you are right now? What are you doing right now?
Sure.
And then let's spend some time just kind of breaking down how God's got you from where you were to what you're doing today.
yeah, so we're here I'm from Lebanon, Missouri, about 2.5 hours. A town of about 15,000, and I'm a senior pastor of Teaching Connections from First Baptist Church, Lebanon, and so that is actually the church I accepted Jesus in November 1st of 2009.
So you grew up in that church?
Grew up in the church. Well, I wouldn't say grew up in the church. I showed up at the church.
Okay.
My parents, to this day, mom and dad separated, but neither side have a relationship with Christ. I was the first person in either side of my family to come to the Lord, and since then, I had the opportunity to baptize my little sister, and she was the second person to come to the Lord on either side. And so, there's many members of my family that have never seen me preach, to not come to my ordination. And so, no, I literally showed up, and you'll hear a little bit about that in the conference, but grew up in a secular home, accepted Jesus in 2009 after a bout with depression, anxiety, and a near suicide attempt on Halloween as a 16-year-old kid. Wow. Came to Jesus and eventually became a youth pastor, and then was voted in as a senior pastor last year. So all of it right in that same church. Nothing's changed.
That's so neat. Talk about just for a second, where the whole podcast episode isn't going to be about this, but we live in a day and age in which some people, especially pastors, leaders, they move around a lot. Mm-hmm. What's the blessing of staying in one place for a long time?
Well, you know who your audience is, you know who the people are, you know the stories, you know the history. It's funny because before I surrendered my life to ministry, I was a detective and a deputy with the sheriff's office in Laclede County, and they always told us in the academy, they said, do not be a cop where you grew up. Because you may have to rub elbow, you may have to arrest the guy that you sit next to in science class junior year. To me, it actually was a benefit because I knew where certain people would go. I knew, and so for me, I used it to my advantage as a police officer to say, hey, this is where I was born and raised. I can tell you everything you need to know about Lebanon, Missouri. And the First Baptist Church, there's some truth to that as well. And there's just the buy-in factor of, we have a first-time guest, and they may feel uncomfortable, and I can say, hey, listen, I came in here 12 hours after I wrote out a suicide note, and I didn't know what God had planned for me. I didn't believe in God. Yeah. And I can literally point to the balcony in the chair that I sat in when I gave my life to Jesus. And so even from an evangelistic perspective, I think there's some benefit to that as well.
So you make the move from detective to pastor. ever a moment where someone like walked in the church, saw you, and then turned around and walked back out because they were like, I don't want to get arrested?
Similar, I wouldn't say that's happened, but what is cool is baptizing people that I arrested. And that
Wow.
actually, we have a girl in our church, and I can say her name. Her name's Gabby.
Yeah.
And she tells the story. She wants me to tell it from the pulpit all the time. She and I got into a vehicle pursuit because she had a federal warrant.
Wow.
And she spent 3 years in the Missouri Department of Corrections, got out, found our church, accepted Christ, and then I got to baptize her on her and to be able to tell the church, hey, 4 years ago,
Yeah.
I was driving down East 32 in Laclede County trying to arrest her on a warrant.
Yes.
Now I get to baptize her and get to
Yeah.
disciple her, and she's been an incredible, and so even those examples of like being a cop before going into ministry, how
Yeah.
in the world is that effective? It's been pretty cool to see the testimonies from that.
Praise God for the work that he does, transforming people's lives. I had an amazing story a couple weeks ago. A guy texted me and was like, hey, I still really want to get baptized. Should we do it before I go into jail or after I get out of jail?
Yeah.
And it's just, man, God's doing some cool things in
I've
people's
never
lives.
thought I would have to answer the question, how do you baptize somebody with an ankle bracelet, a probation?
But now you know.
And so we called a judge and find out, hey, is there any way? And so we baptized her with her leg hanging out of the water, but we were able to baptize her, and she insisted that we do it that way because she said, I know there's other people watching that may have the same ankle bracelet, and it's a statement to them. And so it just goes to show the gospel's for everyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you come into that church. Obviously, the place you're in there is different than today. Walk us through who you were then, kind of what your story was. Obviously, depression is a part of your story, but also some disbelief in God, then to a misunderstanding about who God is, and then now an understanding in who Jesus actually is. Kind of walk us through that process.
Yeah, so the golden calf in my life, the one thing I always chased was intellect. And that to me was, if I have the best arguments, if I have the best answers, then I win in life. That was my purpose. And, I did speech and debate. I was all-state my junior, senior year, went to pretty far in debate my senior year in state. And so that to me was my identity. And what I also learned in my high school is that Christians did not know Christianity. They did not read the Bible. I had memorized portions of the Old Testament. I loved talking about Exodus 21:20 and how do you beat your slave, but as long as you don't kill them, it's not a sin, but and all these things. And I would go to FCA meetings and say, hey, explain Exodus 21:20. And never had a student that would carry their Bible around school, but wasn't able to give me appropriate answers.
Yeah.
And so I think there's an unfortunate fact in my chapter that I talked people out of their faith.
Yeah.
And some of those I've been able to circle back around to. But to me, it was this aspect of I'm right because I can articulate what I believe is the correct position, which is naturalism. There is no God. Love others and love yourself. And ultimately, in the end, it's all futile because in 100 years, we're all going to be gone. And so that was really the aspect of where I was at just in high school. And I think, I don't know your involvement in youth ministry, but I know when I was a youth pastor, there's so many students that they're going off to colleges and they're going off and they're receiving what they believe to be the most efficient answers because they may sound the most convincing, which is why I think apologetics is so incredibly important that we're able to have these conversations.
Yeah, and anymore, it's not even just when they go off to apologetic or when they go off to college. It's when they're experiencing these arguments through TikTok or Instagram. It's they see some influential person providing something new that they've never heard before, questioning the thing that their parents or their pastor have told them, and they're leaving the faith before they're even leaving the home.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, and I hate to sound condescending, but those are often really, really bad arguments. And there's good arguments for naturalism. I truly believe that. There's also really bad arguments. And the problem is sometimes we latch on to the arguments that are not bad, and they're very superficial and shallow, but they, for some reason, we will gravitate towards that. And so I would love to go back and talk to 16-year-old Roger Sherrer. And as Roger Sherrer says very eloquently, and with many syllables, the arguments on why God does not exist, to say, Roger, you sound really good, but I'm just here to let you know that those arguments don't hold water, and to be able to go back and answer those arguments because nobody else seemed to be willing to do that.
Yeah, I think there's usually two ways to handle a kid like you were. One is you have the youth pastor who they see that kid coming and they just kind of exhale a sigh of like, here it goes.
Yeah.
Or maybe, you have a friend that's like that. Or the other one is you're just as argumentative and like your blood is just kicking in and you're ready to go. What's some advice you would give to, a college student that has a friend that they're trying to reach out to that has that very similar mindset? They've seen some arguments on YouTube about how Christianity's false and it's been corrupted and, King James altered all the Bible, all those different types of things. Or the student pastor that's working with the student and they're just so antagonistic towards truth.
No, that's a good question. And I think, I'll say first and foremost, no atheist to my knowledge has ever converted to Christianity because he lost a debate.
Wow.
And so debate's important. I love debate. I debated in high school. And even as a Christian, I got to debate a fellow Christian last year on the age of the earth. I think debate's wonderful. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. However, sometimes we want to see debate as I'm right and you're wrong, and that very rarely is going to humble somebody to say, okay, fine, I'll accept your position. The other aspect I'll bring up is, what I consider to be the greatest apologetic verse in the New Testament, 1 Peter 3:15.
Yep.
In your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks of it of the hope that is in you, but do so with gentleness and respect.
We missed the last part.
Yeah, and I think in my testimony, there was no argument that would have converted me, but it was the love of a pastor who befriended me, even though we didn't agree on anything.
Yeah.
And yet, because he loved me, when I woke up that morning broken and alone, I decided, okay, this is the morning I decide to go to church. And that was the morning I gave my life. And so what I tell people, you may not have the best arguments. They may bring something up that you're like, whoa, I've never thought of that.
Yeah.
But as long as you love them and you treat them with gentleness and respect, when I was 16 years old, I needed a church, but even more than that, I needed a friend.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it was friendship that broke my walls down the only thing for me to wrestle with on that Sunday morning was the gospel itself. And that's my best advice.
Yeah, I think people forget you can win the argument and lose the person. And if that's the end result, what's the point?
Exactly.
So after you've had this experience of atheism in your past, antagonism, but you also said that Mormonism somehow played into your story as well.
Yeah, and so it was 2 years. And so in 2012, I was a freshman going to community college, and I wasn't deep in theology. And honestly, I can honestly say that even though I had a radical conversion, I probably read the Bible more as an atheist than I did a Christian. Yeah. And so I was visited by two awesome dudes that knocked on my door, and of course the Mormon missionaries. And immediately I told them, hey, I'm a Baptist. I go to a church. And they gave me a challenge. And they said, hey, that's cool. We love Baptists. We're Christians too. Why don't you just read this other testament of Jesus Christ? And we believe in Jesus. We believe in the resurrection. We believe in all that. But would you just promise that you might read this book? And so I told them, I said, sure, I'll read your book. But of course, after that, they told me to pray in James 1:5, if any of you lack wisdom. And I thought, hey, they're using the New Testament. That's great. And so I read the Book of Mormon. And I prayed about it, and through my conversations with these missionaries, one thing that they really honed in on was family. And it all came back to the family. Now, as you could probably picked up a little bit with my family, my mom has not accepted my conversion. My dad hates that I'm now calling myself a Christian.
Yeah.
My brothers are confused. And the one thing that these people are playing my heartstrings on is all about family.
Yeah.
The one thing in my life at that point as a 19-year-old kid, I didn't have that. And so that ultimately brought me in to say, hey, they're still Christian because that's what they were peddling. They believe in the Bible. They do all of these things. And yet their foundation is family. That's what I lack. That's what I need. And so ultimately I made the decision to get baptized and in a 2-year span, got very actively involved and almost went on a mission, very, very closely went on a mission, and then at the very end realized, oh no, as I started reading, is actually the book of Galatians, and realizing there's something wrong with this. And so shortly after that is when I left and went back to my old First Baptist of Lebanon and really started studying my faith for the first time and realizing the errors of what I had gotten myself into.
I've heard the stat given multiple times. One of the biggest percentage of converts to Mormonism are Southern Baptists. Yeah. Now, I've looked for that. I don't know if there's any data to prove it, but there seems to at least be the stereotype, the stigma that that's true. Why is it that maybe Southern Baptists or Baptists, why are they so susceptible to being swayed to the what Mormons would call as the truth?
Because I think the problem is again, it goes back to Roger in high school and realizing that, oh no, all of these FCA kids don't know the Bible, they don't know theology. And even as a 19, 20-year-old, my theology was lacking as a new Christian. And I think the problem is that for so many of us, we, as Southern Baptists, we say, hey, as long as you believe in the basics, the foundational principles of Jesus, and when you take away theology, the Mormon message is actually a pretty enticing message. It really is an enticing message. The fact that I can be sealed with my family for eternity because my Baptist preacher says we're not married in heaven, but I get to be for time and eternity with my spouse. Well, that sounds pretty good. I get to do all of these things. I get to receive these blessings. I get to have all of these aspects that the Mormon church promises. It is very, very, very enticing. And so I can see Southern Baptists, and you say, okay, what of our principles? Well, I believe X, Y, Z. Well, hey, guess what? The Mormons believe all of those things. Well, I believe the Bible's the Word of God. Don't you dare touch the Bible. Well, hey, guess what? We believe that too. We believe the Bible to be the Word of God. Well, Jesus is my foundation. Hey, guess what? Do you know what our actual name is? The Church of Jesus Christ. Oh, it's actually in the name. Wow, you guys really are Christians. Okay, hey, sign me up and all the other stuff. Who cares? And I think that is where we have to be theologically sound. And I'm not saying you have to recite, you have to be a PhD student, but you have to know the basics of your theology and why theology is so incredibly important. Because if theology's out the window, if theology doesn't have a role, well, then let's all be Mormons, because there are a lot of things that they promise that are very, very nice, but it goes far beyond that.
So they want to present this idea that they are Christians. Jesus Christ is in our name. We're the same as you. We're just a little bit different. What is the deal with the matchup between what we would say Christianity, Protestantism, evangelicalism, whatever label you want to put it on it, what we'd say is biblical Christianity versus what Mormons would claim, what they believe? What are the differences that would make us say, hey, actually what we're saying is to be a Christian is very different than what you're saying is to be a Christian?
Yeah, and there's so much to answer that question of, why what I would call Orthodox Christianity, the Orthodox view of Jesus Christ. If you go through the Orthodox view of Jesus, almost every single one does not qualify in the LDS faith, because Muslims speak very reverently of Jesus. They believe Jesus to be a prophet. They believe Jesus to be a tremendous guy. They believe Jesus to be divine, but that doesn't make them Christian. And I think the problem is that I can take this cell phone and I can say that this is Jesus Christ and I truly believe this phone to be Jesus and I worship that phone. That wouldn't make me a Christian. That would make me very, very wrong. And so, the aspect of Jesus is Jesus eternal. Well, of course, open the Gospels. Go to John chapter 1. In the beginning, we immediately see that the New Testament, there's no question that Jesus, in the beginning, he is eternal. In the Mormon theology, Jesus is not eternal. Jesus is a created being, of many created deities, many created gods. And so just that, on that topic alone, that point alone, you cannot say, I believe Jesus is a created being amongst many created beings that are equal to Jesus. I've now thrown out any view of Orthodox Christianity out the window. That doesn't even go into the Book of Mormon, which then is of course, is a counterfeit document, which then creates more stories of Jesus that are completely unbiblical, completely heretical, and I think you could argue completely blasphemous in some ways of saying this is actually who Jesus is. And so that's where you have to define Jesus. And any Mormon that says, hey, we're Christians, it's in the name, we believe these things. Okay, let's define terms.
Okay. So you think maybe starting there with even just the question of who is Jesus, that question is going to help people get to the root at some major differences right away. Yeah,
and even if I have a Mormon missionary knock on my door, even if I'm just sitting on the couch in boxers, I'll immediately say, hold on, let me get some clothes on because we're going to talk for a second. And I always go to John chapter 1. How do you explain John chapter 1? And I think it's that simple, of Jesus being a created being, because if he is, oh boy, we're now in a completely different gospel.
Yeah. Are there any approaches you've seen people take with Mormons that you would advise against? Any
Yes. Don't bring up polygamy. Stop bringing up polygamy. They haven't practiced polygamy since 1890. Wilford Woodruff, their president. Now, we can get into why he denounced it, because all of these colonies and states were kicking them out and they needed to be an actual religion. But I've seen so many people that say, well, I don't understand how you can have so many wives, because in the Mormon church, as today, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, if you practice polygamy, you are excommunicated. And so that's low-hanging fruit for a Mormon to respond, well, I don't believe in that. And in fact, I think that's terrible. So I know in the media and I know on television it's fun to poke fun of the polygamy thing.
Sister wives, all those
I get
types
it.
of
Yeah.
things.
When I was a Mormon, all people wanted to talk about was polygamy. And back then, Mitt Romney, because I became a Mormon in 2012. And I felt like I'm talking to all these Baptists and all they want to talk about is Mitt Romney and polygamy, which is the easiest conversation for a Mormon to have. And so don't bring up what you see to be mainstream criticisms of Mormons, because we were talking about this on the right here. Mormons are very, very intelligent. They're very, very well versed. Every 4 years, they read the Bible from cover to cover. They go through, they have 4 different scriptures, and the Bible is one of their 4, what they would consider to be divine books. And so they, as a church collectively, will read the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, one time every 4 years. I hope nobody in my congregation listens to this. I'm wondering how many people in my congregation have read the Bible from cover to cover in their entire life. And so we're not talking about, ignorant people. They're very well versed and they know what to say. And so again, going back to why theology is important, knowing what to say, but avoid the, half-hearted arguments that really don't move the needle one way or the other.
Yeah, it's kind of like the ones that are attempting to be just mic drop moments, whether it's polygamy or, former statements of the church on African Americans. You get to have your own planet. All of it can be brought up at some point, but if you start out with that, it's almost just they're going to see it as an attack on themselves rather than a conversation.
This is antagonistic. Now, is it important to talk about, the fact that the Mormon Church didn't allow blacks to hold the priesthood until 1978? Absolutely, that's an important conversation. Is that the gentleness and respect approach when I see a Mormon? And the question is where's your heart? Again, do you want to win a debate against a Mormon? Well, I can give you the tools to win a debate against a Mormon. But what I think is more important is that Mormon inherits eternal life and that he receives the same gospel that you and I have received.
Now, the average Mormon, like you said, is going to know a lot. They're reading, they're being instructed, but I've also ran into, it seems like some of them don't know as much as other Mormons. Is there a difference in how deep you're into the church versus how much knowledge you're privy to?
Sure, yeah, and that's where you really get into the temple, and of course those that hold what they call the Melchizedek priesthood, which is the second priesthood. I held the Melchizedek priesthood, so I was an elder, had gone through the temple, had done all of those things, had gotten my patriarchal blessing. And when a missionary is sent off, you spend what is called Mormon boot camp in the missionary training center, where they give you a crash course on anti-Mormon apologetics. This is how you respond to all of these things. And so anytime you're talking to someone and they say they served a mission, you can know that they've been through the boot camp. They know what to say. They know how to counter the arguments that you may have that may be very convincing. And so I would say in general, yes, those that have received the Melchizedek priesthood, anybody that's gone on a mission has had to have received the Melchizedek priesthood. And they are going to be the ones that are going to be the most well-versed. And for me, that was me. I was able to take that debate passion as an atheist and, hey, guess what? I can kind of use that as a Mormon as well. So.
The best I've seen to go forward is to attack it on like 4 different pillars. Who is Jesus? Who is God? What do we believe about the church? Because they want to say we're really the same thing, but I mean, even Joseph Smith brought up that the creeds and covenants of the church were an abomination. And so what's the doctrine of the church? And then really, what is the gospel? Is gospel by grace through faith in Christ, or is it by grace through faith in Christ and then some sort of works element?
And that's what it all comes down to. And even the plan of salvation. What is the plan of salvation? Well, you need to do these things. Being sealed in the temple is something that is mentioned. Keeping the word of wisdom. And so drinking tea and coffee is included in salvation. And you talk about works-based theology. Mormonism is the motherlode of works-based theology. So yes, I really think justification, and for me, Galatians chapter 2, and you can go into anything that Paul wrote that is, I would say, antithetical to what Joseph Smith taught when it comes to theology.
And there's so much we haven't even touched on how Mormonism started, who Joseph Smith was, which just unloads its own bag of bunny rabbit trails and all kinds
Joseph
of stuff.
Smith, one of the most evil men in American history, a guy by the name of Brigham Young.
Right.
And
Brigham Young University.
Yes, and of course, we were talking. The one thing I kept from my Mormon faith is my BYU fandom. So I still root for BYU. But Brigham Young was a pretty evil dude, and some of the things that were happening in the early church, that the modern church and LDS church has done a good job whitewashing a lot of that information. But there's still information in church history that is still relevant. So
yeah, and it's only becoming more prominent. We are located right now in Rogers, Arkansas, just a few miles from here in Bentonville, a massive Mormon temple that you can see from the highway, which I think a lot of people in Northwest Arkansas would have thought, this is never gonna be here, but I have friends in Utah who say they refer to Northwest Arkansas as Little Utah. Yeah. And so it's only becoming more prominent. What are you as a pastor right now doing in your church? You've talked about the importance of investing theologically. Why don't we end our discussion by saying, what are some ways that maybe you're doing right now or you're attempting with your people to make them more theologically sound so that getting drawn astray from false doctrines like this is less of an occurrence?
Well, I think what we're doing right now is the most important. I think there needs to be good conversation and good discussion. And I think that pastors around, and for me, of course, I'm a senior pastor of a church, but I also have a passion in apologetics. And so, we have apologetics classes. I know a lot of churches will do apologetics conferences if they're able. But at the very least, one thing that I always encourage that we've done is have a worldview night for your church. And that could be something as simple as a Sunday evening and saying, hey, the first Sunday of the month, we're going to do a worldview night. And we're going to pick a different worldview, and we're going to have an open dialogue, and we're going to have a discussion, and we're going to learn the Christian response. Because I quote G.I. Joe all the time, knowing is half the battle. And for so many Christians, we've got to know. And, 2 Corinthians 10:5, we demolish arguments that go against the knowledge of God. And so I think in these situations, are we just supposed to go around and debate people? Not necessarily. But when things come up, and especially with Mormon doctrine where it is counterfeit, and counterfeit. I mean, I know when my mom came home with a really nice Michael Kors purse that she bought on the streets of New York, and I looked at that and I had to tell my mom that was a counterfeit purse. And that's a tough conversation because my mom, she wants the real Michael Kors purse.
Right.
Here's the good news. We have the real Michael Kors purse. Yeah. We have the real thing, and it's free. Yeah. And I think that's where we really, it comes down to. And so for pastors, for leaders, you don't have to be a pastor. You can be just a guy in a church or a gal in a church that has a passion for truth.
Yeah.
I think that having these types of conversations is where it begins.
Awesome. Well, Roger, thank you so much. If someone's listening right now and they want to hear more from you, maybe even especially in the realms of Mormon apologetics, you're here doing an apologetics conference this weekend. How can people contact you? How can people follow up? Do you have any social media handles, or what information can they touch base with you to maybe bring you to speak or hear more?
Sure. So, of course, our church, First Baptist Church Lebanon, FBC Lebanon, on Facebook. You can look us up on there. But my name's Roger Sherrer. I accept all friend requests unless I can tell you're a fake account. and of course, now we get 20 fake account friend requests a day. But I'm a former detective. I'll find out if you're real or not.
Yeah, don't try to catfish this man.
Please
He'll get
don't.
You.
Please don't. My wife, Caitlin, we've 1 year of marriage. Let's get to year 2. So,
hey, thank you again for listening to Lead Defend. Don't forget leaddefend.org for all the coming information and events for Lead Defend and upcoming episodes. We hope you'll listen next time.
That's it for this episode of Lead Defend. To hear more episodes from the Lead Defend crew, visit absc.org/podcasts. If you liked what you heard, rate and review us on your favorite podcast listening site. Want to learn more information about the next Lead Defend conference? Visit leaddefend.org.